Okay, today is February 23rd, 2023, and we're at the Cape Charles Museum, and we're going to be interviewing Lloyd Kellam. He is a Cape Charles icon. He has all kinds of good memories, and so anyhow, we're going to try to gather as much as we can, and probably there will be future interviews, hopefully for additional information, which, because I know we can't get it all in one take here. So anyhow, I thought we'd start out with your early years here, your memories about growing up, maybe your friends who you played with, what you did, helping your father, those kinds of things. And
well, you'll think I'm lying when I tell you this, but I can remember back till I was 2 years old. I know that sounds silly, but I can remember sitting in my backyard on Madison Avenue, and it's just a flash. And anyway, that's sort of crazy. And but anyway, and then I remember being hit on the head with a snowball with a piece of coal in the middle of it. Dougie Chonok did that. Dougie's about 3 years older than I am, but we had moved from Madison Avenue to over the store, and one of the things back on Madison Avenue, Mother had a bottle of cooking wine, and she kept it up at the top level of the pantry, and I can remember climbing up on a ladder and getting up on this stoop, getting into wine and drinking wine, and the next thing you know, I was drunk. I was about 3 at that time, but other than that, I remember being over top of the store that was next to the bank, and we lived in the apartment over the store, and everything. I've said in later years that the world passed by my front door, and I knew loads of people, and I mean, it was just, the ferry came in there, the train came in, and one of my stories is that over the holidays, the military was moving troops, and they were either waiting to catch the steamer or they were waiting to catch the train. I think they must have been waiting to catch the train, and they all wanted sandwiches, and Daddy and Mother went upstairs in our apartment, and Father Miller, who was our old high school coach, he's a priest, he came up there, and they raised, I can remember bushel baskets full of sandwiches that they made to carry on the train and sell the soldiers, and it was unbelievable. And Daddy had empty gallon jugs that held Coca-Cola, and we made Coca-Cola, carried over and sold them. But they didn't have stuff like that. They didn't have take-out Coca-Cola cups like they do today.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you actually made up food and took over to the troops that were waiting on.
At this particular time, I remember that, and I remember the priest coming up, because I thought that was mighty funny, but at the same time, they were only going to be there a few hours, and away they went.
Yeah.
But
so did he preach to them any, or was it just strictly he was helping you guys?
You followed in his footsteps, and you were preached to, I can tell you. Did you all know Father?
I remember his name, but I don't say.
He was pretty young when he was here.
Yeah.
He was the man.
Yeah.
In fact, I've said he was a little bit of everything, but one of the things that he had a child's heart, and he loved children. And I mean, as a Catholic boy, we cut the grass and trimmed all the flowers and all that around the church. And every summer he'd take us somewhere like New York City, Virginia Beach, Ocean City, Ocean View, they had an amusement park over there, roller coaster and all that stuff. But he just loaded us up in the car and take us, and it was unbelievable. But and then he restarted football. We had a football team early on. I hope you don't mind if I call people's names, but I was looking through some book and I saw that Benji Dishram had played baseball, and I can't remember now who played football. But
did you ever hear of a guy named Battery Baker? He was before your time, but I've read something about him. Maybe he played football back in the 20s. But with a name like that, I would think that would scare the opposing team. Battery Baker.
Never
like
heard
assault and battery.
He was Jeanette Wilkins' brother, I think. Remember Billy Wilkins and Jeanette Wilkins?
There was George Wilkins. There was one named George.
Mm-hmm.
Dan.
Yeah, this was Dan's brother, I believe.
I never knew him.
Well, Dan was your coach at some point, wasn't he?
He was our high school coach. Best coach that a man could ever have. He was the man that said, you'd get hurt in the game. He'd say, is it bleeding? And you'd say, no, it's not bleeding. He'd say, well, you're not hurt yet.
If you would tell football stories here, we think you ought to wear this.
Oh my Lord! My, you know, they threw. I had mine in the drugstore, and they threw it out. It was leather, and I can remember it had a leather thing there in the middle of it.
Yeah, I remember when we were scrubs and playing football. We were in the 8th or 9th grade, and we wore the old uniforms. And I think I had one like that. It had the leather.
Right,
you know, like
and we had cleats that you had to screw the cleats in.
Yeah.
And they were dangerous because if a cleat came off, you could get cut.
Yeah.
Bill said as part of your football stories that you would demonstrate this 3-point stance that you used to have the picture taken in the annual.
Yeah, I can do that still.
You and Regis
Now, the trouble with it, I can't get up.
We thought it was a 4-point stance now, you know.
I had pictures taken with my cousin Regis Etz.
Yes.
And we have a picture in about the 3rd grade on a 3-point stance, each one of us. And it's been 10 years now, but a couple of years before Amos died, he brought Regis over, and we're in the backyard, and we pulled that old 3-point stance one more time.
And that made the newspapers.
Yeah, you know, Regis was a good athlete. Did you ever know him?
Knew of him, but I didn't really know him, no.
Did you ever know? Anyway, old man Otto was my mother's uncle.
Oh, okay.
He came over from Germany. Mm-hmm. He was older than my mother.
Okay.
A little bit, but anyway.
Yeah, I remember him down at the Kool Corner there.
Oh yeah, well my sister owned the Kool Corner before the Etzes did.
Oh, okay.
Dusty, they called it Dusty Rhodes.
Okay.
And anyway, they used to sell hamburgers and hot dogs and frozen Milky Ways.
Yes.
And zeros. Absolutely, I remember that.
Yeah, Kool Corner.
Full of money.
That was very profitable.
Oh, I bet it was.
And it was. They enjoyed running it.
Well, I can remember when we were kids. You know, a car would pull up there on the end of Randolph Avenue, and by that time the ferries had moved down to Kiptopee. And they'd come over and they'd say, which way to the ferry? And Otto S. would say, he'd tell them for 50 cents how to get to the ferry.
Well, you know, that's sort of interesting, but I remember we had a black guy that worked for us from the time I was young, named Leroy McWilliams. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you ever knew him or not, but anyway, Leroy, we had a deal with Leroy. He would keep the store clean, sweep it out and sweep the sidewalk and wash the windows and all that. And Daddy let him have the shoe shine stand. And anyway, what can I say about him? I had some story I wanted to tell you about Leroy, but in fact, many stories. Yeah. But he he went in the Navy, and he worked on the ferry in between working for Dad. Like when he was off on the ferry, he'd work for Dad.
Okay.
But my mother loved Leroy, and she had a nickname for him. She called him Step and Fetch It. And then she just called him Fetch It. And do y'all like lamb?
I'm not crazy about it. I don't.
He used to cook lamb chops that would make you put smack your mama.
Yeah.
He didn't like it.
But that's the story about Leroy.
Did he work for Harry Rudy also and have a shoe shine stand? Was he the same guy?
No, that was
James May.
who?
Wasn't it James May?
James May.
Yeah.
He was the school
Custodian, yeah, I remember.
custodian.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was the nicest
He was.
man that I ever knew.
Yep.
You know, he worked for a Mrs. Not James May, but Leroy worked for a Mrs. Ewell in Cape Charles as a young boy, and she got him to clean the house. And when she got back home, he told her, he said, "You don't owe me any money. In fact, I'm not going to work for you anymore." And she said, "Why?" And he said, "Well," said, "you hid a $5 bill under the carpet just so I'd see it was there and take it." But I said, I didn't take it, so I know you were trying to catch me as a thief. And he says, "I'm not going to work for anybody like that."
Yeah. That's.
But he was a cook. He had learned how to cook in the Navy, and then when he got out of the Navy, he had learned how to cook, and he used to make things like grapefruit pie and I mean all kinds of crazy.
Now, this was James May.
No, this was Leroy McWilliams.
Step and Fetch It there. Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh yeah, well, you know, I am writing a book, as you may know, and one of the things I've got a little section in there about all the black people that had worked for Dad, and anyway, we had one of them named Winston Church, and they called him Winston Churchill.
Yeah, of course.
And they had one that weighed about 400 pounds, and he was called Tiny. Would you all know what a 55-gallon drum looks like?
Sure.
Well, Coca-Cola used to come, the syrup used to come in 55-gallon drums, and you put it up on a rack, and you had this bung on the end of it. You'd drain it off into gallon jugs. But anyway, I've seen Tiny pick up the whole 55-gallon things and put it up in the rack. He was a very strong man.
Yeah, I don't think you want to mess with him there.
But he was not the strongest man in Cape Charles.
Yeah.
And in fact, nobody should ever write a book or ever talk about Cape Charles without talking about John Haff.
Oh, yeah.
John Haff. In fact, my mother, as a really young girl, remembers John Haff. And she lived on the plantation, Scott Estate down in Plantation Creek. And she used to have to walk to town, and she said that he was another nice man, that he was nice to children. And
And he's kind of almost a mystery there. There's not a whole lot about it. Laura's doing something now, I believe, on
but everybody ought to do a little reading on him, because he was something else. His real claim to fame was that he could crush a clamshell in both hands or something like that. But he broke a steer's neck trying to get him to come up on the land. He got caught in the water, and I read that recently. And but he did a little bit of everything. But everybody should know about John Haff.
Could he? There's a story like when I worked in Export, there was a guy named Buddy Lewis who was big like that and all that kind of stuff.
Buddy Lewis.
And one of his feats of strength was said that he could jump out of a barrel. And I'm wondering if John Haff could jump out of a barrel, or if that was ever said of him.
He might have done that, but that guy, what was his name? Buddy Lewis. Buddy Lewis could pick up a 55-gallon container of peaches had been frozen, you know, and or they were to be frozen, and.
Yeah, I can believe that. Well, let me ask you something else. You told me at some point that your father, when he first came to Cape Charles, I know at one point you said he worked in the building houses or stuff like that, or helping people build houses and other things, and I was curious.
Well, he had a most interesting life in that his sister's husband got killed in an accident in Norfolk. He was on a trolley car, and the trolley got hit. And but anyway, it was my grandmother made sure that there was a man in the house to take care of these children. The oldest one was like 7 years old or 6 years old, and my father went down to live with them, and he was like 12, 13, and he started peddling fish. He had a little fish business, and then the next thing you know, he wasn't making enough money doing that, so he applied for a job with Mr. God, I can't think of his name.
Lambertson?
Mr. Lambertson, as they were building the Front Street, all those brick buildings, you know, where Mass drugstore was. Do you remember where that? Anyway. And anyway, Daddy got the job, and the first day he came to work, he had on a pair of short pants. And Mr. Lambertson fired him right down on the spot. Well, it broke my father's heart. And anyway, he told Dad, he said, I've never hired a man that wore short pants. But he said, I'm going to lend you enough money or give you enough money to buy a pair of long pants, and then come back and I'll hire you again. And anyway, he did. Daddy went out the next day, got himself a pair of long pants, and came to work and worked for him for a while. I don't know how long it was, but then he worked for Adam Barban. Adam Barban had Adam's Quality Shop.
Yep.
And Sigel was his son.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Barban got killed right in front of Daddy's pawn shop. There are lots of stories about the pawn shop, but anyway, I'm laughing about one of them that comes to my mind.
Go ahead. I'm going to interrupt you.
Daddy they sold everything in there. One was, he said one time he had a real fancy overcoat that had velvet around the top, and he said they couldn't sell it, nobody wanted to buy it out of a pawn shop. So Daddy took newspapers and cut them all up, put a rubber band around them, put them on the inside pocket, and some guy came in and told, and he was looking for a coat, and Daddy told him that the only one they had was this one, and Daddy belonged to a rich man, and he had left money that they never could find out where it was. Daddy said the man reached and touched it, and he says, "I'll take it."
That's salesmanship there.
Yeah. But Mr. Barban and Dad were partners, and she'd pick up the money, and they sold guns and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, as she walked out the door, I think his name was Mr. Taylor, was the policeman. Am I right about that?
I was thinking it was Bob Reynolds, Pop Reynolds. I mean, there was Taylor. He was the one that was shot and killed. There's a memorial in the schoolyard to him, and that would have been around 1918 or 19. It could have been him because he was a police chief. But
anyway, he was standing on Savage's corner. Savage Blessed King was there, and he was, and some guy that had stole something out of one of the stores, and he went to the corner and told him stop. And he shot him. Mrs. Barber walked out the door at the same time, killed her dead right on the spot. And but anyway, and then Daddy and Mr. Barber went into pool room business. Now, this is something I haven't told you before, but I may forget who they were. Willie Hop. You ever heard of Willie Hop?
He was a pool shark.
He was a
wasn't
pool shark.
Yeah.
Ralph Greensleeve.
Haven't heard that name, but
And Greensleeve, Willie Hop, and there were 3 different good pool players that had played in his store. Anyway, they wound up selling that, and Daddy went in business for himself after that.
so they played at his pool room.
His pool room.
Oh wow!
And Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and
Holy cow!
they came. They were waiting for the steamer or the train, and they came over, and Rusty, Joe Rusty's father, the old man, he was older than me. He and Daddy went to the hardware store and bought a baseball and got Babe Ruth to sign it. And anyway, he kept it. And I remember Mother telling me that people would ask him, "What are you going to do with that baseball?" He said, "I'm going to save it for my son." Well, I never got it. Daddy was playing ball on one Sunday, and they lost their ball. So Daddy said, "I've got a baseball in the house."
Oh.
So he took that ball, and they lost that one.
Oh.
And that got me in the autograph business.
Mm-hmm.
And
Imagine.
I've got autographs.
Yeah.
Up there.
Yeah, I bet you got a pretty serious collection.
Yeah, but all of them was one summer. I did it one summer. I hadn't found girls yet.
Well, you had a lot of opportunity probably with people passing through Cape Charles on the trains, maybe.
Well, it was, yeah, they did, but the boys who really taught me things were the soldiers at Fort Custis and the sailors that would come. They would come in on Liberty and go into the stores in Cape Charles, go into Daddy's. Daddy sold beer, and they all liked their beer. And anyway, it was what it was. But soldiers taught me more about mathematics and geography. I can't remember what one guy taught me how to remember the names and capitals for the states, like Maine, Augusta, New Hampshire, Concord, Vermont, Montpelier, Massachusetts, Boston. I could name all the states and their capitals in order as they came. But there was a way to do it, and this one guy taught me how to do it. But you know, it was just different. I mean, what can I say?
You were, I don't know if you'll remember anything like this or not, but when we were growing up, Dougie Charnock was, he was well known around town by us little kids. He was always doing stuff, that we thought was dangerous. He rode a bicycle off.
Tarzan.
But anyhow, at some point, no, I'm messing up here. It was Melvin Village. Melvin Village I'm talking about. Well, then Melvin apparently went in the Navy. Does that sound right?
Went in the Army.
Army, okay.
Or Air Force.
Okay. But anyhow, I think he came home from training and he was learning to be a navigator or something maybe. And he was walking out on the dock at Kings Creek, and Tom Ballard had been out there working on an engine or something like that, and met him. Tom was coming in, I think, and Melvin was going out, and Melvin had his sextant with him. So he stopped right there and calculated. He told Tom Ballard exactly what his latitude and longitude was. It's very useful to Tom.
Did you all know Melvin Village?
Not well.
Not real well.
He's been fishing with him some.
Yeah, he was different. He was not too bad an athlete. He played backfield.
Was he older than you? Or?
He's 1 year older than me. Okay. Melvin Village.
Yeah. Have you ever seen
Bill was his mother. Mm-hmm. And Harold Village? What was his name? Yeah, I was just thinking about, at one time I think it was 20-some cars of chicken feathers spent the night or 2 nights in Cape Charles, and it smelled so bad you couldn't stand it. Anyway, that
I can remember that, and I can remember my uncle who was earlier on, Rupert Fulcher. You probably don't remember him. Rupert Fulcher.
No.
When he was growing up, he was my mom's brother. But he talked about how bad the Sandy Island, that was a menhaden processing, and how bad that used to smell.
Oh, I bet it did.
So yeah, back in the day, there wouldn't have got many tourists to come here. I don't think.
When the menhaden boats used to come into the harbor on a summer evening, that was pretty strong too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember that at a certain time of year when crabs, I guess, or I'm not sure. Knowing what I know about crabs now, it must have been in the spring of the year, but you'd look over at the harbor, you'd see nothing but boats from Tangier.
Yeah, I remember that.
And one guy was walking down the main street in front of Daddy's store, and he said, "My God, boy," he said, "just look here," said, "they got coal oil running through those lines up there." Said, "That's what lights the lights, coal oil."
Yeah, they were interesting people. That added, I thought, a lot of character to the town.
Oh,
You had those people
absolutely.
Coming in. There was a guy named Kisses Crockett. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not. He was more towards Jan and I's age, but he loved Shakespeare. Or no, Omar Khayyam. Whoever wrote Omar Khayyam, but he loved that story or poet or whatever it was, and he could tell the whole story. But anyhow, the bottom line was William and Mary invited him over there to talk and tell the stories like that, because of his Tangier accent was so early English, that it was something. And he had on his boat, he had a regular library of books, So those guys were more, a lot of them had a lot more to them than just pulling crab pots up. They were had some depth. More
But
depth.
there's so many little things that come to my mind. One is like the street lights that they had in the middle of the streets, especially Madison.
Yep.
Was it Monroe, I guess
It
it
had a big
is.
island.
Yeah, and then Peach Street.
Yeah.
Is it Peach?
Yeah.
They had lights, and they had lights for policemen, so that no matter where a policeman was in town, he could look up there and see where the light was on. He needed to go call the sheriff's office. And
My mom I asked her one time to write up, she was a telephone operator, and I asked her to write up, when Jim Lewis wrote his book, about some of her memories as a telephone operator and what things they did. And one of the things that she said was just what you're talking about, that if somebody called in with a problem, they had a means of turning that light on to get the police there to, take care of it, or call in to the telephone office so the telephone operators could tell them where to go and what was the problem. And Jan and I just yesterday saw one on Tazewell Avenue still up on the pole.
Right across from the Christian school.
That yellow light there, so that's kind
well,
of a blast from the past.
where you're talking about, when I knew the telephone office was in the old Northampton Times building.
Yeah, that's where Mom
On
was.
Randolph Avenue. On the front of that, and on the back side behind the Northampton Times was where I went to kindergarten.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No.
Ms. Westcott taught that. And I can remember we used to paint in reverse on glass.
Wow.
And she would get you to paint, turn it over and paint trees and people and all that stuff backwards. And she was an interesting lady.
Yeah.
She weighed about, I swear, she weighed about 600 pounds.
Big in there.
Oh my Lord.
Do you remember Rebecca Scott? Did you ever have her? Everybody else did.
First grade,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I do remember she was my first grade teacher, Miss Latimer. Rebecca Scott. Miss Latimer was my fourth grade teacher. Miss Parsons was my third grade teacher.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Clore, was Miss Clore your fourth grade?
Cora.
Clore, C-L-O-R-E.
Clore, yes, Miss Clore. She was not that teacher, but she was a teacher.
Yeah.
She was further on up the line. Miss Chandler, did you ever know Miss Chandler?
Yeah, she taught as a substitute, I think, when we were. How about Sarah Doherty? Did you ever meet her or know anything of her?
Sarah Doherty.
Yeah, she was a kind of a legendary school teacher way back, and I don't know how long she taught to our era, but Rebecca Scott, I remember her. We were there for her last year. She
was a nice lady. My Lord.
Yeah. But Sarah Doherty told a story. This is sort of like something that you could have gotten tied up into there at some point. But one day these boys played hooky. It was 4 of them, I think, played hooky. So they didn't show up for class. Well, when they came to class the next day or whatever, they told Miss Sarah Doherty, she says, well, what happened to you all? She said, well, we were in our car and the car broke down. Had a flat tire. And so she said, okay. And so she asked them all to leave the room except for one. And she asked him, he said, which tire was flat? And then she called the next one in, which tire was flat? Make sure they had her story together.
Never heard that one, but that's good.
Yeah, she was pretty slick.
Well, I'll tell you what, Miss Parsons, I guess she was.
Yeah.
One of the things I remember about her was she would sit you in the corner and crack your knuckles with a ruler. Get you to stick your head out and crack those things. And I didn't mind sitting in the corner, but I sure minded the cracking of the knuckles.
My first remembrance of Rebecca Scott, we were in first grade and we were getting, indoctrinated and all that kind of stuff. And I was sitting next to this girl, Ann Wilson, I think was her name. But and she spit on the floor. She was a young kid, and, but anyhow, and Miss Scott came over there with this ruler and bashed her across the knuckles, and I thought to myself, I ain't gonna spit on the floor. That's my lesson for today,
Yeah.
But she was tough, but they could get away with it.
Only in Cape Charles, really.
Yeah.
I tell you, I was trying to think of who else I may have had. Miss Vale. Did you ever have anybody named Miss Vale?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Anyway, I can't think of anybody much.
Yeah. Well, so your school years, one of your biggies, I'm sure, was football.
Oh, Lord, yes.
In fact, Jan and I brought a few things that you might remember here. For this segment, you might want to wear this hat. Did you ever have one of those?
No, I never did.
I could see getting in a lot of fights over something like that when you were a kid. But anyhow, and let me show you what else we've got here, just so you'll know.
Oh, my Lord.
All the signatures are gone from it now, but it's in a display case we have over there.
That was the year that we beat Northampton 93-0.
That's what I wanted to get on tape.
That is the year we did.
You told
And
me.
we got a little gold colored football with the date on it. And I had mine until about 15 years ago, I guess. Anyway, what a deal.
I'm glad you said that, because every time I tell somebody that we beat Northampton, Cape Charles beat Northampton 93-0, never happened. So we got to document it.
You know one thing? These are little crazy nothings, but I scored the 93rd point.
Really?
I was the center for Cape Charles, and I remember we went back. We'd scored a touchdown. It was 92-0, and I went back, and the quarterback was getting ready to call the call. I said, "Look, I've been playing for 4 years now, and I've never scored a point." I said, "Let me run the ball." And so, all I remember was somebody from up around Exmoor said, "My God, Lloyd, you're going to run all the way to the beach?"
Yeah, that was good. I'm sure some of the guys you'll hang around with did pranks every now and then that you may
Oh yeah,
may or may not want to talk
this
about.
wasn't a prank. This has been weaving in and out of my mind. But we had a guy named Mr. Letson.
Yep.
You remember Mr.
Oh,
Letson? Mr. Letson came in when I was a senior, came into class, and he said, "Lloyd, will you come and speak with me a minute?" And I was, "What have I done?" So I got out in the hallway. He said, "We got a new set of boys in first grade, and they don't know how to use a toilet. Will you go in there and show them how to take a whiz in there?"
That's a lot of responsibility.
It was a lot of responsibility. I said, "What in the heck is he got me in?"
You weren't part of the group that put his car behind the school there in such a manner that you couldn't get it out. It was like the car, the slot that you all put it in was about the same width as the car was, so you couldn't back it out or move it back and forward.
No, but in the windows at the bank, there was somebody had a little English car, and it was small enough to fit in there. And the boys didn't fit that car in there one night, sideways, and I don't know how they ever got it out. It took more than one man to get it out. But the ferry brought a lot of people too, whether they were from the Eastern Shore or not. We had two men that I remember called Len and Sud Bell.
Sud Bell, yes.
They were brothers, and they were from Quimby or Waterbury, one or the other, and they used to sit on the bank steps on Saturday night and play for money. People would toss money to them, but they could play a ukulele and a banjo and the guitar, and unbelievable what they.
So did you ever hear him play?
Oh, absolutely, more than once.
Well, when they had the tall ships that came into Cape Charles, the last time they had them, it was a really neat happening. But anyhow, there was a guy who sang ballads and stuff like that.
Bob Zentz.
Bob Zentz was his name, and he had a squeeze box and all that. And sometime during that event, there was a tent set up, and it was getting dark. But anyhow, he started playing this song. And it was about old Sud Bell sitting on the porch of the Waterbury Hotel, and he did his little story went along with it, where he went to see Walter P. Chrysler somewhere, and it's a neat song. I've got it somewhere on tape. It's not.
Speaking of things that you read and things, when we beat that last year that we played, we beat Pocosin, and Pocosin had the fastest man in the state. He won the state championship in running, and Charlie Powell was playing end on my side of I was linebacker, and he played defensive end. He was an end anyway, but he played defense. And 2 plays, they had 2 running plays, and they had scored 2 touchdowns. This fast guy outran Charlie Powell. Charlie was pretty fast in his day, and he beat him. And when the game was over, we won by 1 touchdown. And but the last, I can remember, I see it right now. The last play that we ran the ball, Charlie Powell got the ball and was ahead of but he was sideways of this guy who was so fast, and he outran the fastest man in the state. Honestly. Now, it was such a feat that Jack Daniels John Daniels, the guy who was the newspaper man. He had come, and he hadn't been to any of the games, but he came to this one, and he wrote a little thing, and somewhere I've got it, a copy of it, and I don't know where, but I'd like to find it. But it starts out, they came over here with several buses and a band on one of them, and all that stuff, and unloaded in front of the thing. And this thing says, Pocosin came with bands relief, the Cape Charles of Gritters to defeat. They made their gains and passes to Scott, to Etz, to Billets too, or something like that. I don't know how that was, but and he published it in the newspaper.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I can remember when we were growing up, of course, Charlie Powell was a lot older than we were, and he was a police chief at one time, but they called him Bulldog Powell.
Bulldog, he was Bulldog.
From football, I'm sure.
He looked like one.
Yeah, well, he did.
I've had this thing on and off several times of nicknames of men in Cape Charles and how they got their name. And I remember one Saturday night, Cape Charles was dead, and I used to call Savages almost every Saturday night and talk to George or Tommy. But I was talking to George this night, and I said, George, I said, how did Muttbender get his name? Have I told you this? He said, my God, Lloyd, have you ever looked at him?
Yeah, things weren't kind and gentle necessarily back in the day there.
We had a boy that went to school. He was about 2 years older than me. His name was Go Shy.
Go Shy.
He played a lot of cards. But Go Shy.
Go Shy. I've never heard that name before.
Well, you got a new one now.
Well, he's good. He had to deal where he could put the cards up his sleeves and all that kind of stuff. And pull them up from behind his ear.
I know you had a nickname.
Fat Boy.
Fat Boy, yeah. One of Jan's girlfriends back in the day there, Judy Culver. We were in the backyard one day doing something, I can't remember what it was, and she addressed me as Fat Boy. And he heard it, and of course from there on
You had a nickname.
Flea during high school.
What was it?
Flea, F-L-E, like the bug
Flea.
that lives on the dog.
somebody found a flea on him in church one day, I think it was, or something.
You know, it's sort of strange the things that pop in your mind. But one of the things, there was an alley between the Chesapeake Hotel and the bank, little 3-foot alley or something like that. Yeah. And I used to keep my bicycle back there, that alley, and stick it behind the Army and Navy store. But anyway, several things happened back there. That's where Daddy had rented a room out of the hotel. Is where he kept his Coca-Cola and all that stuff, that 55-gallon that Tiny used to work on. But anyway, we had a coal bin back there, and Daddy raised chickens during the war in that coal bin. You couldn't get any meat, and anyway, I find that to be very interesting. But Tiny used to slaughter the chickens, and one day we were right there. He's cut their heads off, and you've heard the expression "running like a chicken with its head cut off." Well, sure enough, they'll do it. But Tiny would grab them and wring them.
Wring the neck. Yeah.
Wring their neck. Yeah. Which I find to be very interesting. But we used to get, the two icemen used to pull a whole 300 pounds of ice back and put it in.
Slam dunk.
Well, you'd have to figure it was 3 blocks on top and 3 blocks on the bottom, but you had to get an ice pick and cut them all off. But we did not have an electric. There was no such thing as an electric ice grinder. And one of my jobs as a little boy was to grind ice. The hardest damn job I've ever had. Both stores that Daddy had, my job was to grind ice. And Tommy Savage, who was the pharmacist at the other store, he used to tell me that he didn't mind anything they ever gave him to do except grind ice.
So what did you have a regular, like a hand cranked ice grinder?
Well, you had a shaver on one side. Had a little blade stuck out, and you had a handle, and you crank it, and as you'd crank it, it would shave off the ice on the other side, and it'd fall down in a bucket.
Oh, okay. So it's like a little spring-loaded thing, maybe that kept pressure on.
Well, you'd push it down in that level. You had to be real careful. And then Daddy had one, Mr. Getzel, when he bought Getzel's. Do you remember Getzel?
Lou Getzel, yeah.
When Daddy bought Getzel's store, he had an ice grinder that had little prongs on it. And same thing, the prongs went around.
Just scrape it.
And scraped it, but you had big pieces of ice.
Yeah. I didn't know Luke Getzel, but he and my dad were friends. In fact, there's a picture out here in the museum, out there near the Jetty House, and there's a picture of Dad and Luke Getzel standing together swimming. They were up there going to jump off.
Well, Luke Getzel, and golly, I can't think of her name right now, Miss Bernstein. Miss Bernstein was German. She was a German Jew, and she and Luke Getzel went swimming every day for a year in Cape Charles Harbor.
Wow. My dad, I've got a picture of him standing out there in the ice. He used to swim in the wintertime. Now, he didn't swim every day or anything like that, but I've got pictures of him standing out there in the ice in his bathing suit. So.
His first business was making horseradish at the factory down here.
Oh.
It's hard to believe.
What do you do here in town at the knee-high plant?
Yeah.
Wow.
Made horseradish.
That's interesting.
So now you know the rest of the story.